Hello and welcome to Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on YYC Business. Joining me today is Stephen Paynter, who is principal at Gensler. Thanks for joining us today, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a great topic for discussion.
Yeah, we're going to talk about downtown revitalization. Has been in the news here in Calgary this past week. City Council approved the other day $200 million investment to sort of kickstart some vibrancy back into the downtown. And part of that whole plan, and it is a $1 billion plan over 10 years, but part of that plan, I think it was $45 million geared towards converting office space into residential space. Now, Stephen, your company, Calgary Economic Development, asked you to look at 28 buildings in the downtown, representing 3.2 million square feet, and how many of them could be converted to residential. What did you guys find out?
Well, really, it was supposed to be a test of how we could do this and whether it would work, whether it was a good idea. I mean, at the beginning, we weren't set on going to council and asking for this investment. It was really an exploratory exercise. So we started looking at how we could convert buildings, which ones made good candidates. Were there enough buildings in the market that were good candidates that it would actually make an impact? I mean, if we'd have looked at 28 buildings and only one made sense, it would have been, not a waste of time, but it certainly wouldn't have gone ahead. So we studied the 28. We developed a really quick and easy way to score them, basically by taking all of the good things about a residential building, how deep the units would be, how many elevators you have, what ceiling height you could get, and comparing those to the information from the 28 office buildings. And the ones that were the closest match to each other, those buildings scored the best. And so of the 28, we found that 10 to 12 were really solid candidates. That basically, if you didn't know it was an office building and you looked at the floor plan, could easily be reimagined as a residential.
How many, if all, say, 10 or 12 were converted, how many housing units would that represent roughly?
It comes to about 4,000.
Oh.
So it's pretty significant. Like it's, 4,000 people.
Yeah.
We normally talk about people. It's about 2,000 housing units, about 4,000 people. Obviously, it's bringing people to the downtown is what's critical. It's not just creating these units. It's the people that are going to live there and drive the community.
So when we look at the possibilities of doing this, what are some of the main things to consider? Is this a hard thing to do? Is it an expensive thing to do? Can you talk a little bit about that and explain that?
Absolutely. Well, the most important thing to consider, we discovered as we were going through this, is that the worse the office building is, the more difficult it is to lease, the lower the ceilings, the less elevators there are, actually the better that is for residential. And that might not sound kind of totally intuitive, but you think about an office building, if you go into a Class C office building, it has 11-foot floor to floor height. And once you've got all the ducts and the T-bar ceiling and the lights, you end up with about 8 feet or 7'6" clear ceiling. Now in an office building, that's considered really pretty unpleasant. Once you strip all of that away, everything that was there for the office, and you open the building up, all of a sudden you're going to have residential units that have about 10'6" ceiling heights. You're right up to the underside of the concrete. You don't have as many ducts. You don't have as T-bar ceiling in your house, I hope anyway. So what that does is allow for a much bigger, much broader units, a lot more light coming in. So those office buildings that aren't great are actually lending themselves very, very well to residential. And that was our main kind of discovery.
So are those, I don't know if this is a safe assumption to make, but can we look at the older class buildings, are they more conducive to this than say newer class buildings?
Yeah, absolutely. And that ties into the economics as well. As you know, not just Calgary, but most of Canada went through a bit of a boom in the 70s. There's a lot of 70s office stock, especially in downtown Calgary. And those buildings are really at what we call end of life. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to fall over or anything dramatic like that. It just means the mechanical systems need replacing, the facades need replacing, and they're really kind of starting to get tired. Now, if you're going to plow a lot of money into those buildings, and renovate them anyway, because you're going to need to, you might as well convert them to residential or to another use instead, rather than keeping them as kind of half empty office. So
Yeah.
we really found those buildings, the 70s buildings that need investment, that generally have lower floor to floor heights, generally have less elevators and stuff as well. Those buildings are actually really the prime candidates for conversion. It's not the new Class A office buildings, it's not the Bow or anything like that. It's these kind of smaller 70s buildings.
Well, and some context here, like the overall downtown vacancy rate in Calgary for office buildings is around 32% right now. But it's for those lower class buildings, those B and C class buildings, that's even much higher. And I would presume that the vast majority of those buildings are west of Fifth Street in the downtown core, correct?
Yeah, they absolutely are, and we've done kind of some heat mapping about where these buildings are. And you're right, most of them are on the west side. Most of them are older, and actually, all of the 28 we looked at having a vacancy above 50%. Some of them a vacancy of 100%. So
Yeah.
they're really not doing much right now. But it's actually good, I think, for Calgary that those buildings are clustered together, because if you can do a couple of projects that are very close to each other, then two residential building conversions starts to be able to support new retail, new restaurants, new parks, new
Yeah.
libraries, services, doctors, all those kind of things, and you start to get a little community. Now, if these buildings were spread out all over Calgary, you would not be able to have the same level of impact as quickly as you can with them being focused in one location.
Yeah. So, where do you think this is going to go? It's obvious that there's a push for this. There's a
Yeah.
lot of interest from a lot of people, politicians to businesses to economic development groups, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think we're finally going to get to the stage that this is going to become a reality?
I think it will, and I think it really has to. If you look at the history of Calgary real estate, obviously you're an expert in that, so I won't lecture on it. But over the last 10 years, and we went back and looked at every leasing study for 10 years from all the big brokers, they kept saying, well, vacancy's gone up 2% this year, but next year it's going to be okay. And every year for 10 years that's happened effectively. There's a few bubbles where it came back, but what's happened now in the last year is oil prices have crashed. The pipeline's been probably dead forever, and we've had COVID. So all of a sudden, these things have come together and meant that people no longer really are just having this blind faith in the future, and they're active and willing to do something about it. And that comes from everyone, the public, the council, and from the developers. So there's this big momentum behind trying to create something, trying to change something, and actually add some vibrancy, I think, back to the city.
Okay. One of the last things I wanted to ask you, Stephen, I understand Gensler did a bunch of research on other locations in the world and what they're doing in this regard, in this area. What did you find that was key, and what did you find that could be helpful for Calgary as it moves forward in here?
Yeah, so we actually did two things. The first was look at other cities in the world that have done something like this, whether it is successful, and what the city councils did to make it happen. So we looked at tax incentives, we looked at credits, we looked, all these different economic levers that the city could pull to make things work. And we sent this kind of huge unreadable package to them of hundreds of pages of bylaws and things like that, which they worked through to come up with their economic plan. So that was part of it. The other thing that we were really interested in, obviously, is places that have done this and done it successfully, and places that were in Calgary's situation or in a worse situation. A big two that were really kind of relevant and not too far away is Detroit, which obviously had major issues back in 2014. Interestingly, this is my favorite stat from the whole thing, actually, is that Detroit's downtown vacancy rate was 14% when they declared bankruptcy. So Calgary's is double what Detroit was. It's very scary. But Detroit put some processes in place to revitalize the downtown, to do conversions, to bring people back. And they've actually had great success, and they're still in the process as well. So we can have a lot conversations with them,
Hmm.
figure out how to do it, learn from the good and learn from the bad.
Yeah.
But there's some great projects there, like the Shinola Hotel, which was basically one hotel, converted a few office and retail buildings, created a hotel and a restaurant, a couple of stores. That really kick-started a neighborhood. The
Hmm.
retail across the street leased up. The university took a plot just adjacent to them that should be in a demolished building for about 15 years. They've started to develop that. That's under construction now. Some more restaurants moved into some parking lots and garages that were at the back of the building. And all of a sudden, there's 4 or 5 city blocks there that are really vibrant, and they've, a great nightlife. They have people there during the day, and it's really, a good example of what you can do in a small area. And then that kind of slowly bleeds out to the rest of the city, and people start to have a reason to come down there.
Well, that sounds great, and gives the city here hope, I guess, that something can be done, right?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, a lot of this is about just positivity. Like, let's do something, let's get some momentum, and then bring people along for the ride with us. And that's really the only way that you can make change on this kind of scale. You can't just sit back and hope something will happen. So you've got to get that positivity, and you've got to kind of drive people to get involved, developers, councillors, and obviously the public too.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for joining us today, Stephen.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks very much for having me.
Okay, that was Stephen Paynter, who is principal at Gensler. This has been It's Your Business with Mario Toneguzzi on YYC Business. Thanks for joining us today.